This is our Punk Bite for the first week of April, and maybe kind of a reality check as we head into what is actually the last month of our lab time. So the time is ticking down perhaps faster than we want it to, but in that time I know that many of you are going to excel in learning even more as teaching assistants, and you've already done so much. So I thought this was such an awesome time to talk a little bit about teaching philosophies, because at this point some of you have learned a great deal about how it is that it works the best for you to facilitate the learning of your students. So I thought I might give you a little bit of background and descriptive language to help you talk about your own teaching philosophies. And when we talk about our teaching philosophies, we say that that is our pedagogy. Pedagogy means the science of teaching and learning, science and art of teaching and learning. Let's go ahead and bring up a short handout that is available on your TA Jump Drive, and so you can look at this at any time to get a little bit more with regards to these teaching philosophies. And I'll say just a few words about each. Historically, a lot of teaching was rooted in a behaviorist philosophy, which quite literally means that we measure the actions as a product of learning. So we do a lot of that still, even today. The idea that we can look at the student's sterile technique as a measure of their learning is really a behaviorist sort of philosophy. However, I wouldn't consider myself to be a behaviorist in the way in which I garner my teaching philosophies. I'm more of a cognitivist, but even more of a humanist. So cognitivism was the idea that we could actually track the thought process that was involved in learning and focus in on the inner thought, and that we could also think about the way in which environment could contribute to learning, and that everyone comes to a different conclusion based upon their prior environmental background and social background, so that those things all affect the way in which we meld and mold thoughts within our mind, and that we could focus maybe in on more on that process-oriented learning. This was the first idea that the teacher served as a role model, and that's a part of cognitivism that I firmly cling to, that the teacher does set an example. And we all know that expression, do as I say and not as I do. The best teaching, in fact, that we do is by being a good role model in our own everyday activities, and students really look to that as a way of learning. More than anything, I am a humanist, and I believe that learning can be a means towards self-actualization. That is, that learning can be very, very transformational for an individual, and it is really only in those times that we truly deeply learn, when we are seen as a whole thinking being, and that when we educate, we see our learners as whole people rather than just as the behaviors that they display. This is where Carl Rogers comes into play, and his idea of student learning, student-centered learning, and this is very important to me. I am a student-centered teacher. I like to involve, and as all of you know, I was just having a conversation with Callie about this the other day, the idea of integrating students, their backgrounds, their interests, their passions into all of the teaching that we do. So we're facilitating the development of a whole person as a thinking being. This is a very important part of what guides my pedagogy, and I consider myself to be more of a humanist than a constructivist. However, constructivism is probably the biggest buzzword in learning theory right now, and many educators identify as constructivists. This primarily means that in constructivism, we would say that every learner constructs their own reality based upon the building blocks that they already have available to them, and that no matter what you do as an educator, a learner will construct their own realities based upon their background. This is something that I do believe is true, but I think that it has been used in many cases as a way for educators to be very lazy, because they just say, well, the student is constructing their knowledge, I don't really need to play an active role in that. And so it often leads to the very hands-off teaching sort of strategies, which I think are ineffective and sometimes even at times damaging. So although do cling to some ideas of social constructivism, that is, that our environment does shape who we are and how we learn, I believe in being a very active part of student learning. So I believe that the teacher as role model is very important, and that facilitation in the learning process is absolutely critical. Any more that you want to talk about this, I can talk ad nauseum about it, so let me know and we can continue this conversation in another context. But for right now, we need to talk about the schedule, and the upcoming week is exceedingly busy. It is advising week. It is also our third lecture exam. So while I have already done a bulk of my advising, I will be focused in on that lecture exam, and I wanted to go ahead and thank those of you who are already committed to helping me either with grading or proctoring that exam. You all make my life possible on an exam week, and for that I am always, utterly grateful. Also this week, Amy and Mara will be helping me out in Open Lab, and on that same day that we have Open Lab, that is the last day to withdraw from classes. So if you know you have a student who is struggling and really should withdraw, please remind them that this is the last day to do so. It doesn't hurt to actually announce it in all of your classes so that all of your students do know that it is the last day to withdraw in case they have another class for which they're concerned and maybe want to take that option. This week we will be doing Lab 19 and 20 for everyone but T and Alaya, who will be going on to Lab 21. I'm not going to talk a lot about the Lab 20 or the Lab 19 TA guidelines again, because remember, there is no lecture for that. We do, however, want to make sure to make use of that lab period for announcing to the students about the available resources, the dichotomous keys and tables that are available online to help them with their unknown, but also to make sure that they are doing a good job of keeping up with the tables in their notebook. I can't stress this enough. I think it would be a good idea to decide as TAs to individually go around and check everybody's progress on their tables and make sure they all know how to make those entries in the tables in Lab 18 and how we're eventually going to be assessing those entries. We're going to be making sure that they have made the entries in their lab manual. We're also going to be grading them as their entries take form in the typed version. So it's really important to make sure we're fully communicating that to the students and the why behind why are we having them do that. So that being said, let's take just a moment to look at the TA guidelines for Lab 20 and 21 as we'll continue and then finish our unknown identifications in that time. So a couple things for Lab 20, they will be interpreting a lot of tests on that day, so it's very helpful to go around and help them with those interpretations, and particularly on tests that might be pivotal, to help make sure that they are getting the right results for those pivotal tests. Also during this lab, we will be lecturing on the CAMP test and we'll be lecturing on the MRVP test. There is some additional information given in this TA guideline about both of those. But also there will be a subset of students who do have a gram-positive catalase negative coccus on which they'll do the CAMP test. So we want to make sure that at the CAMP station there is a plate with Staph aureus on it, and that Staph aureus has to be a particular penicillin-sensitive strain. So we want to make sure the right plate gets out there. In addition to that, I think I already mentioned retyping the tables and just getting your students up to speed on that. That will be important. Continue to be an important thing. So take a look through this TA guideline as you go. Make sure that you're all ready to go for either the CAMP and MRVP or whoever is giving that lecture. Just a quick note on Lab 21, there are a couple of things here to remember as well. Actually, both in Lab 20 and 21, we're going to want to make sure that the heat is turned on. It's a dry heat remember, for the acid-fast stain, but then we're using steam for the endospore stain. So depending upon which stain they're doing, they'll need one or the other of those. So in theory, during Lab 20, they'll need the dry heat likely, and in Lab 21 the steam heat, but it partly depends on when they decide to do that endospore, how well their cells have aged on the NSM auger. So just keeping an eye on that, the hot plate or steam bath. We will, in Lab 21, need to have the students start their MRVP immediately. So those tubes that need to incubate for 3 to 5 days, will be ready in Lab 21. So we'll have them start that, put it aside, and then it needs to sit for about 40 minutes. And so it can sit while we're giving the lecture. And even as we're giving the lecture, we can draw attention to the color changes that occur in the VP test. If it is becoming positive, it will start to turn pink at the very top, and then it'll start to pervade the rest of the tube as the 40-minute time period continues. So that's an important thing, just getting that started. You can also have students who have a gram-positive rod flood their iodine into the starch side of the plate so that they can read the halo around that if they've got an alpha amylase oligo-16 glucosidase positive organism on that plate. We'll also lecture in Lab 21 about the last few biochemical tests, and it doesn't hurt to tell your students that these are the last of the tests that we will be presenting and that they will need to know these tests for the practical exam. So it's just a good reminder, make sure you get going on, that screensaver or whatever it is that will help them to study and remember all of the biochemical tests, not only for the practical, but for future identifications of unknowns. So that wraps up our unknown identification, but we also need to make certain that we do assign the unknown report during this lab period. And the due date for that, I'm going to pull the schedule back up. The due date for that is actually going to be on either the 17th or the 18th. And the only downside of that, so that gives the students a week and a half to complete it, even after Lab 21. So hopefully they've already been working on tables and whatnot before that. But the hard thing for you all is that does mean that you need to get it graded and turned around in a week if possible. That may be hard, and so you just need to communicate with your students. If you're not going to be able to turn it back to them by the 24th or 25th, you're going to need to let them know that, because that'll mean that they won't get it until they do their practical exam. So I know this is looking ahead, but we do need to begin to think about the fact that on the 29th and 30th, we will give that second practical exam. So we'll just want to have that in mind and kind of on our radar. Wonderful. I think that is a wrap, and I can't wait to see you all this week.